We're counting down the 25 branding day meals ranch hands ate after wrestling cattle from dawn to dark. These are the dishes that fed the American West through spring roundups, dust, blood, and 18-hour days in the saddle, cooked in cast iron over mesquite coals by a man who answered to cookie and nobody else. From beans that simmered before sunrise to pit barbecued beef that fed 40 hungry men at once, each entry tells the story of hunger, thrift, and the strange genius of feeding a crew with no icebox, no oven, and no store within 60 miles. Expect cuts you've never heard of, desserts made from vinegar, and flavors forged where nothing could be wasted. Which branding day feast tops the list? Let's begin our countdown with number 25. Number 25, the cold biscuit and molasses in the pocket. Branding day began in the dark, and the first meal of it was barely a meal at all. Hands rolled out of their bedrolls at 3 in the morning, pulled on stiff boots by lantern light, and grabbed whatever the cook had left on the chuck box lid, a leftover sourdough biscuit from the night before, split and dragged through a puddle of blackstrap molasses, then jammed into a vest pocket for later. It cost almost nothing. Molasses ran about 35 cents a gallon in the 1890s, and a barrel lasted a whole season. That biscuit went cold and hard in the pocket, sweating through the cloth, and by the time a man had roped his 10th calf and the sun was climbing, that dense, sweet, half-crushed thing tasted like the finest food on earth. Old hands swore the molasses stain never washed out of a good vest. Number 24, Arbuckle's coffee, boiled black and mean. No branding day ran on anything but coffee, and in the West, that meant one name, Arbuckle's Ariosa, sold in a paper sack for around $1 for a 5-pound bag, so dominant that cowboys simply called any coffee Arbuckles. The cook dumped a fistful of grounds into the pot, filled it with creek water, and set it in the coals to boil hard, then tossed in a splash of cold water or a crushed eggshell to settle the grounds to the bottom. It came out thick, black, and bitter enough to strip paint. The rule was famous across the plains, and if a horseshoe wouldn't float in it, it wasn't strong enough. Hands drank it scalding at 3 in the morning and again after dark. Never with sugar and never with cream. Arbuckles put a peppermint stick in every bag, and grinding the beans was the one chore men fought to do because whoever ground got the candy. Number 23, sourdough biscuits from the everlasting starter. The sourdough keg was the most valuable thing on the wagon, more than the rifles, more than the coffee. It rode wrapped in blankets, and on cold nights, the cook took it into his own bedroll so the culture wouldn't die. That starter fed a crew for a decade if it was tended right. Every branding morning he'd pinch off a mass of it, work in flour, salt, and a spoonful of bacon grease, cut the biscuits with a tin can, and set them in a Dutch oven buried in coals with more coals shoveled onto the lid. 20 minutes later, out came biscuits with a crackling crust and a sour, tangy crumb that no store yeast could touch. A cook who let his starter freeze was said to be finished in the trade. Hands ate 6 or 8 at a sitting, for gravy at breakfast, for beans at noon, for molasses at dark. Number 22, sobelly and fried salt pork. Before refrigeration ever reached a line camp, salt pork, sobelly to every man who ate it, was the fat that made the West run. It came in slabs packed in barrels of brine, cost about 8 cents a pound in the 1880s, and kept indefinitely in a hot wagon box. The cook sliced it thin, freshened it in water to draw out the worst of the salt, then fried it hard in the Dutch oven until the edges curled and the fat rendered out golden. That grease was the real prize. It went into the biscuits, into the beans, into the gravy, into the skillet for the potatoes. The meat itself was chewy, aggressively salty, and eaten without complaint. It wasn't beloved. It was insurance. A barrel of sowbelly meant nobody starved when the beef ran short. Number 21, pinto beans, the prairie strawberries. The bean pot went on before anyone else was awake, and it never really stopped. Cowboys called them prairie strawberries or Mexican strawberries. And on a branding crew, they were the calorie engine that made the rest possible. The cook soaked pintos overnight in the water barrel, then set them in a Dutch oven at the edge of the fire with sawbelly, an onion if he had one, and dried chili pods, and let them work for 6 or 7 hours while the crew wrestled calves. Dried beans ran 2 to 3 cents a pound, so a 100-pound sack fed a wagon all spring for the price of a day's wages. By supper they'd gone soupy and dark, the liquor thick enough to sop. Hands ate them from tin plates balanced on their knees, mopping with biscuit. A cook who scorched the beans could expect real trouble. Burnt beans on branding day was close to a hanging offense. Number 20, corn dodgers and Dutch oven cornbread. When the flour ran low, and on a long roundup it always did, the cook fell back on cornmeal, which was cheaper, heavier, and available at any crossroads store for pennies. Corn dodgers were the plainest thing on the wagon. Meal, salt, hot water, and bacon grease, worked into stiff lumps and dropped straight onto a greased Dutch oven lid or fried in the drippings until the outside went hard and gold. They traveled in a saddlebag and didn't crumble, which is exactly why hands carried them out to the branding fire. The proper cornbread was better, baked with coals on the lid, cut in wedges, crumbled into a bowl of bean liquor. Recollections from the Panhandle recall men eating cornbread and beans 200 days a year and never once thinking it strange. Number 19, fried spuds and onions. Potatoes were a luxury on a wagon, heavy to haul and quick to rot, but a good outfit carried a sack of them for branding season because they turned a hard day into something that felt like a holiday. The cook peeled them out on the chuck box lid, sliced them thin with a pocket knife, and dumped them into a Dutch oven of hot bacon grease with a sliced onion until the whole camp smelled like a real kitchen. The edges went brown and crisp, the middles went soft, and the onion caramelized into sweetness that cut through the salt of everything else. Spuds ran about a cent a pound by the 1890s, but the freight to a remote camp cost more than the crop. Hands remembered the smell drifting across the pen at midday and working faster because of it. Number 18, airtights, canned tomatoes with sugar and bread. Nothing was more prized in a hot, dusty camp than a can of tomatoes. Cowboys called all canned goods airtights, and tomatoes were king because they were the only thing on the wagon that tasted cold and bright when everything else tasted of grease and salt. A can cost 10 to 15 cents in the 1880s, real money, and the cook rationed them. On branding day, he would stab one open with a knife, dump it in a bowl, break in stale biscuit or bread, and sprinkle on sugar. And that was dessert or lunch or both. Trail accounts describe men drinking the juice straight out of the can in the heat, convinced it cured everything from thirst to headaches. Some outfits swore tomatoes prevented sunstroke. The empty cans never went to waste either. They became biscuit cutters, coffee dippers, and grease catchers. Airtights were the closest thing the open range had to fresh produce. Number 17, sourdough flapjacks with sorghum. If the cook was in a generous mood and the crew had a long day of branding ahead, breakfast meant flapjacks. He'd thin the sourdough sponge with milk if there was any, cut in soda and a little sugar, and pour the batter onto a greased griddle set over the coals. They came off dark, tangy, and heavy, not the fluffy things you'd get today, but a serious slab of food, built to last a man until noon. Over the top went sorghum syrup, sometimes cut with melted bacon fat because butter didn't exist out there. A gallon of sorghum ran about 50 cents and lasted weeks. Old-timers recall stacks 4 and 5 deep, bolted down in the dark while the remuda got roped. Number 16, Roundup hash. Nothing on the wagon ever got thrown away, and hash was the proof. The morning after a beef was killed and the crew had eaten steaks, the cook took every leftover scrap, the trimmings, the cold roast ends, the boiled potatoes, and onion, whatever bean liquor was in the pot, chopped the whole lot fine on the chuck box lid, and fried it into a crust in the Dutch oven. He pressed it flat with the back of a spoon and let it stick to the iron on purpose, because the brown bottom was the best part and every man knew it. Hash cost nothing, which is exactly why it appeared 2 or 3 times a week during Roundup. The men who came late got the scraped-up middle instead of the crust. Number 15. Jerky and dried beef. Long before anyone was selling it in a gas station, jerky was survival gear. When an outfit killed a beef during branding season and couldn't eat it all before the heat took it, the cook cut the lean into long strips, rubbed them hard with salt and black pepper, and hung them over a rope line strung between the wagon bows to dry in the sun and wind. In 3 or 4 days of good dry weather, they turned to something like dark leather that kept for months in a flour sack. Hands stuffed strips in their pockets on branding morning and gnawed them in the saddle, softening a piece against the cheek for 20 minutes before it gave. It wasn't a pleasure. It was the answer to a simple question. How do you carry meat across 100 miles of heat with no ice? You dry it and you keep riding. Number 14, spotted pup. The West had exactly one rice dish, and it was dessert. Spotted pup, rice boiled soft with sugar, canned milk, and a handful of raisins, the dark specks in the white giving the thing its name, was the cook's way of buying a little piece on branding day. Rice cost about 6 cents a pound and kept forever in the wagon box. Raisins came dried in a bag, and canned milk had reached the frontier by the 1870s. He would start it in a Dutch oven in the afternoon and let it set up thick and creamy by dark. Hands who would spend 12 hours flanking calves would line up for it like children. Accounts from the Cimarron country recall a crew grumbling about beans all week and going silent the moment spotted pup came out of the oven. It cost pennies and bought loyalty. Number 13, dried apple pie. There was no fresh fruit on a Roundup wagon ever. What there was in a cotton sack near the flour was dried apples, leathery rings that swelled to 3 times their size in water and cost around a dime a pound. Come branding day, a cook who wanted to be remembered set them soaking at dawn, then stewed them with sugar and cinnamon while the crew worked, rolled out a crust with a bottle on the chuck box lid, and baked the pie in a Dutch oven under a lid heaped with coals. He'd check it by lifting the lid with a hook, sending up a smell of apples and hot lard that carried clean across the branding pen. Cowboys joked that a man who ate too many and drank water would swell up like a poisoned pup. They ate them anyway. Pie meant the outfit was doing well, and everybody knew it. Number 12, vinegar pie. Here is the dish that proves how clever these cooks really were. When the dried fruit ran out and the nearest store was 3 days away, a good cook could still put pie on the table, made from vinegar. He whisked apple cider vinegar with sugar, flour, water, and an egg if he had one, poured it into a crust, and baked it in the Dutch oven until it set into something custardy, tart, and startlingly close to lemon. The whole thing cost maybe a nickel. It came out of a tradition older than the cattle drives, carried west by settlers who hadn't seen a lemon in years and weren't willing to go without dessert. On branding day, it landed on the tailgate warm, cut in wedges, and disappeared in minutes. Nobody today believes vinegar can taste like that until they try it. Number 11, bear sign. Bear sign meant donuts, and the name was exactly the cowboy joke you think it is. They were the single most prized food on the range, and a cook who made them well became famous across 3 counties. It was brutal work. He had to render out a deep kettle of hot lard, mix a stiff sweet dough, cut the rings with a tin can and a smaller cap for the hole, and fry them in batches while 40 men circled the wagon like coyotes. Half the trail memoirs of the era describe crews riding miles out of their way for a rumor of bear sign. Cooks made them by the hundreds and still ran out. There are stories of hands eating 24 apiece and regretting nothing at all. Number 10. Son of a gun in a sack. The steamed pudding came west with the British and Irish hands who worked the big outfits, and by the 1880s, every good cook had a version. He'd mix flour, chopped beef suet, raisins, sugar, and soda into a heavy dough, tie the whole mass in a floured flour sack, and boil it in a kettle hanging over the fire for 3 or 4 hours while the branding went on. What came out was dense, dark, and steaming, sliced thick, and drowned in a sauce of sugar, water, and a little whiskey if the boss wasn't looking. Suet was free, taken from the beef the crew had already killed, so this was dessert built from nothing but scraps and patience. Hands ate it after dark by firelight, and old cowboys interviewed in the 1930s still describe the smell of it coming out of the sack as the best thing about spring roundup. Number 9. Chuckwagon chili. South of the Red River, chili was the branding day standard, and it looked nothing like what comes out of a can now. The cook took the tough cuts, the neck, the shank, the trimmings nobody wanted for steak, and chopped them by hand because grinders were rare on a wagon. Then he browned the meat in tallow, added crushed dried chili pods, cumin, wild oregano, and garlic, covered it with water, and let it work in a Dutch oven for 4 hours until the connective tissue melted and the whole thing turned into a dark brick red gravy that clung to a spoon. There were no beans in it and no tomatoes. Chili pods were nearly free in Texas and New Mexico, sold in long strings for a few cents, and the spice-masked meat a day past its best. It was hot enough to make a man sweat harder than the branding fire had. Number 8. Dutch oven pot roast with wild onions. When a beef went down early in the day and the crew was going to be at the pens until dark, the cook made pot roast because it needed nothing from him but time. He seared a chunk of shoulder in tallow, threw in whatever the country offered, wild onions dug from a creek bottom, a handful of potatoes, a carrot if the ranch garden had spared any, poured in water, and buried the oven in coals with a shovelful on the lid. Then he walked away for 4 hours. That slow, sealed heat broke down a cut that would have been shoe leather on a grill, and the liquor reduced into gravy on its own. Hands riding back at dusk could smell it a quarter-mile out and would push the horses to a trot. The cook carved it on the chuck box lid and poured the gravy over biscuits, and there was never any argument about seconds. Number 7. Beef ribs on the branding fire. The fire that heated the branding irons was already burning all day, so a smart cook used it. When the outfit butchered a yearling for the crew, the rib slabs went straight onto a green cottonwood or mesquite grate set right over those same coals, salted heavy and turned with a hay hook while the irons heated in the bed beside them. The fat dripped, the smoke came up, and the meat cooked slow in the same heat that was stamping the herd. There was no sauce, nothing but salt, pepper, and mesquite smoke. Hands ate them standing at the pen with their gloves still on, one eye on the calves. It was the most direct meal in the whole West, the same fire, the same animal, the same afternoon. Number 6. Chicken fried steak with cream gravy. Take the toughest round steak off the carcass, lay it on the chuck box lid, and beat it flat with the back of a hatchet or the edge of a plate until the fibers gave up. Dredge it in flour, dunk it in canned milk, dredge it again, and drop it into an inch of screaming hot lard. That's chicken fried steak, and it turned the cheapest, meanest cut in the animal into the meal every hand on the outfit hoped for. The technique came from German and Austrian settlers in central Texas who'd been making schnitzel for generations and simply used what the range gave them. The gravy was the genius part. Flour stirred into the leftover drippings with canned milk and black pepper poured over the steak and the biscuits both. By the 1930s, it was on every ranch house table in Texas and Oklahoma. It's the one branding day dish that never went away. Number 5. Calf fries. Branding Day produced one ingredient no other day did, and the crew ate it right there. The cook or a young hand collected them in a bucket at the pen, peeled them, split them, rolled them in seasoned flour and cornmeal, and dropped them into a skillet of hot lard set up beside the branding fire, often eaten within the hour, hot, salted, crisp on the outside, and mild and tender inside. Nobody paid a cent for them. They were the definition of wasting nothing, and every ranching community from Montana to Texas has its own name for the dish. The greenest man on the crew always got dared to eat the first one, and the joke never got old in 100 years. Today, whole town festivals in Oklahoma and Colorado are built around them, a byproduct from a dusty pen turned into a delicacy people drive across states to eat. Number 4, tamales and frijoles at the Tejano brandings. On the big South Texas outfits, half the crew or more were vaqueros whose families had been working that country since long before there was a Texas, and branding day food carried their kitchen, not the Anglo one. The women of the ranch camp spread mesa on soaked corn husks, filled them with shredded beef simmered in chile, tied them in bundles, and steamed them by the 100 in a washpot over an open fire. They came out by the dozen, unwrapped hot at the pens, eaten with frijoles a la chara and stacks of flour tortillas cooked on a comal. Tamales were the perfect branding day food, and always had been. Portable, filling, easy to hold in one gloved hand. Oral histories from the King and Kennedy country describe branding days that ended with 200 tamales gone and the husks piling up in the dirt. This is where American ranch cooking actually came from, and most people have no idea. Number 3, Dutch oven cobbler, the undisputed crown of chuckwagon dessert. The cook opened cans of peaches or reconstituted dried fruit if the wagon was running lean, dumped them into a greased Dutch oven with sugar and cinnamon, dropped a sourdough biscuit dough over the top in rough spoonfuls, and set the whole thing in a shallow bed of coals with a heaping shovelful more on the lid. Then he rotated the oven a third turn every 15 minutes and the lid the opposite way, so nothing scorched. 40 minutes later, the fruit was bubbling up through the cracks, the topping had gone golden and crusted with sugar, and the smell reached the branding pen like a bell ring. Modern chuckwagon cook-offs across the West still judge cobbler as the make-or-break category. Hands ate it out of tin cups with the juice scalding their mouths, and nobody ever waited for it to cool. Not once. Number 2, son of a gun stew. There is no dish more tied to branding day than this one, and no dish more misunderstood. When a calf was killed for the crew, the cook used the organ meats that couldn't be kept: heart, liver, sweetbreads, kidney, and the marrow gut, the tube that gave the stew its distinctive richness, all diced fine and simmered for hours in a Dutch oven with onion, salt, and black pepper. Nothing was added to disguise it, and nothing was thrown away. It took 4 to 6 hours, and it was the surest test of a cook's skill on the whole wagon. Old-timers said a good one was better than any steak, and a bad one was unforgivable. The name, cleaned up for polite company, was the mildest thing cowboys ever called it. It was born of pure necessity in country with no refrigeration, and it became a point of pride, the dish that proved an outfit could feed itself from an animal entire. And finally, in first place, pit barbecued beef. At the end of a big branding, the spring works finished, the calves marked, the crew half dead from a week of dawn-to-dark labor, the outfit put a beef in the ground. Men dug a pit 4 feet deep the day before, burned mesquite or oak down to a bed of coals, wrapped the quarters in wet burlap and canvas, laid them on the coals, shoveled the dirt back over the top, and left it overnight. 12 to 16 hours later, they opened the pit and the whole camp went quiet. The meat came out falling off the bone, smoky to the center, tender enough to serve with a spoon. Neighbors rode over, families came in wagons, fiddles came out. The branding barbecue was payment, celebration, and the social calendar of an entire county rolled into one afternoon. And it's the direct ancestor of Texas barbecue as the world now knows it. Nothing else on this list carried that weight. It marked the end of the hardest work of the year, and every man at that pit had earned his plate. Across all 25 entries, from the cold biscuit shoved in a vest pocket at 3 in the morning to the pit barbecued beef that crowned the spring works, these branding day meals tell a story of hunger, invention, and quiet endurance. Some son of a gun stew, calf fries, jerky dried on a rope, show a world where nothing could be wasted. Others, like bear sign and Dutch oven cobbler, reveal how much a little sugar meant to men who'd spent 12 hours in the dirt. The common thread is cast iron, mesquite smoke, and a cook who could feed 40 men from a wagon box with no ice and no oven. These weren't recipes. They were the taste of an America that worked from dark to dark and still found a reason to gather around the fire.